Hello and welcome to The Pulse. In this week's show, we like to think in this part of the world that we revere and care for the elderly. The reality in which residents at one elderly care home were left naked in full public view really does suggest otherwise. Before that, though, June 4th has rolled around again, and with it the painful memories of what happened in and around Tiananmen Square on that date in 1989. Hong Kong's response to the savage crackdown after 7 weeks of pro-democracy protests was immediate. An estimated 500,000 people took to the streets to condemn it. 26 years on, the commemoration at Victoria Park still goes on. But although they too remain horrified by the event, for some members of the younger generation, the more nationalistic elements of the candlelit vigil and the emphasis on nationwide democratic reform don't sit easily. This week, once again, tens of thousands of Hong Kongers gathered in Victoria Park, holding candles, mourning the dead, and calling for the Chinese government to overturn its stance that the Tiananmen Square protests were a counter-revolutionary riot. For some, particularly the young, in the wake of Hong Kong's umbrella movement protests, the violent suppression of protesters in 1989 has taken on a new immediacy and meaning. Increasingly, though, there are divisions. The organizer of the vigil, the Hong Kong Alliance in support of patriotic democratic movements in China, with its motto of building a democratic China, demands a reassessment of June 4th and wants to promote nationwide change. Many of the young, more wary of patriotic fervour, want to focus on local issues. They say the emphasis on asking the Communist Party to reassess the events of 1989 in itself grants the party a legitimacy they don't believe it has. The Hong Kong Federation of Students, a member of the alliance, did not officially take part in this year's vigil. Student union members from 4 universities, including City University and Chinese University, did, burning copies of the Basic Law, which they say the mainland is not honouring. Others held their own memorial events. Civic Passion organised a rally at the Hong Kong Cultural Centre in Tsim Sha Tsui and joined forces with the other localist groups to arrange another 18 memorials in different districts. On Thursday afternoon, the Hong Kong University Students' Union repainted couplets on the campus's Swire Bridge, originally written in 1989, to remind people how important it is to keep the memories and the historical reality fresh and alive.
可能過往就係一啲人唔認同，即係建設民主中國或者唔認同中國民主、香港先有民主呢啲論述，所以唔去即係支聯會嘅集會。但係今日可能港大學生為呢啲人提供咗另一個選擇嘅時候，佢哋會反而出翻嚟繼續去悼念當其時死去嘅學子，同埋思考香港民主進程嘅一啲出路等等嘅時候咧，我覺得係可以捲動更多人去參與嘅當中。咁所以我就唔覺得係可能係搶咗人哋客，反而我覺得係即係百花齊放咁樣。
每年6、4前後，港大校園電視都會製作一系列嘅有關嘅 production 啦。咁佢睇可唔可以提升翻大家對6、4屠城、8、9民運嘅 awareness 咯。8、9民運同埋雨傘運動都有好多比較同埋共同點。當權者亦都係對即係人民嘅對民主自由嘅訴求，唔係話一個好寬容嘅態度，而係一定會有強硬嘅打壓啊、否定啊。
要撤回831嘅決定，修改831決定，呢啲咧都係不切實際嘅。
我哋而家一齊默哀1分鐘。
In the evening, for the first time, the University of Hong Kong Students' Union organised its own memorial on the campus in Pok Fu Lam. Some of the veterans of the June 4th movement say they're saddened by the growing division in civil society on the issue. In recent years, the post-80s generation began turning away from an emphasis on national identity and arranged their own events. Their focus on local issues has only intensified after last year's protests. Ding Zhilin, a leading member of the Tiananmen Mothers Association in Beijing, believes that it's not necessary to have only one way of commemorating the massacre. Others, such as Zhang Jianling, say they don't understand why Hong Kong youngsters don't see the fight for democracy in China as also being in Hong Kong's interests. Former June 4th student leader Wang Dan published an article yesterday sharing the same view. At the Victoria Park Vigil, organisers took pains to point out that the uphill battle of fighting for democracy is not one that only involves Hong Kong people. More than 100 mainland activists who supported the Occupy Central movement last year were either detained or arrested by mainland security forces. After the 1989 Tiananmen massacre, Lai Chak-fan quit the political organisation Meeting Point, which he helped establish in the mid-1980s. He also withdrew support from the Hong Kong Alliance in support of patriotic and democratic movements in China due to differences of opinion. In some ways, he can understand why civil society is divided today.
其實係80、90後啦，即係好多而家已經係20幾30歲，當時嚟講可能未出世或者只不過係1、2歲。喺感性上啦，我諗對六四係冇一個即係感性嘅認識或者感覺啦，係其實好正常嘅。
At the same time, he says what Hong Kong is facing now is very similar to what China faced after 1989. With a direct drive for democracy giving way to a determination by many activists to fight for human rights that are supposedly enshrined in the Constitution. That's why he thinks this year's June 4 memorial is particularly meaningful, coming right before the Legislative Council vote on the PRC's restrictive proposals for future chief executive elections.
要為佢運動咧就係中共嘅即係統治階級剝削啲打壓啲市民裏邊咧係被逼自發嘅，即係所有抗爭都係同嗰個經濟利益嘅同佢權益出發。你要注意到，就算係劉曉波佢哋啦，佢哋爭取咧就唔係推倒共產黨，只不過爭取咧就話希望呢個中共可以按照憲法裏邊嘅承諾，賦予俾呢個人民嘅權利同埋自由咧，即係落實。因為事實上係講就係有，但實際上冇噶嘛。大家情況同我哋而家我哋基本法面對一樣啊。基本法夠話俾呢個夠話一國兩制港人治港啦，但實際上而家睇到啦，係嘛？即係中共山寨道門，實際上講到明係篩選，講到明係代一世，講到明咧佢嘅民意只係着重佢哋自己即係幕後操縱，即係揾阿周融搞出嚟嗰啲咁嘅假民意先至民意。其實情況係完全一樣。
Although the Hong Kong Federation of Students did not help to organise the vigil this year, they did set up a small exhibition at Times Square from Monday to Wednesday. Their hope is that their booth will have had some influence on both locals and visiting mainlanders.
我自己都覺得雨傘之後呢，係有一大批政治能量係需要唔同嘅人去吸收。所謂吸收就係要組織佢哋咧，並且將佢哋轉化成為未來係能夠推動到民主運動嘅一股力量。咁而六四其實亦都係香港每一年即係一個社會事件角度嚟講係一件好大嘅事情啦。有好多人都會喺前後係會重新去思考翻咩叫民主，咩叫自由，去睇翻關於六四嘅文獻，去睇翻當時嘅情景，同埋再一次係俾當時嘅學生感動。咁呢啲時候就自然會更加多人去參與啲社會時事。
Naturally, pro-Beijing organisations don't like to be reminded of June 4th, 1989. A handful of individuals protested near the June 4th Museum in Tsim Sha Tsui on Wednesday, claiming that most of those killed had not been demonstrators or students, but members of the People's Liberation Army. They were also out last Sunday protesting against the Hong Kong Alliance's regular June 4th commemoration march and accusing it of deceiving Hong Kong people by twisting the facts. Few of those taking part took them seriously. Last weekend's march began at the Southern Playground in Wan Chai and ended at the liaison office with the tying of yellow ribbons to the barriers, another connection between June 4th and Hong Kong's own current issues.
June 4th is completely related to political reform because we believe in one thing. If we in Hong Kong can successfully spearhead democratic reform in Hong Kong for true democracy, this had a big impact on China. And that is also our agenda, to have big impact on China on the democratic front. And the fight in Hong Kong is very important, and we believe that if we are championing the cause for Hong Kong, the umbrella movement is very touching also for the Chinese people to watch and follow closely. And there are people in China who are arrested just for the support of the umbrella movement. So it's the same, and we hope that we can change China before China authoritarian culture imposed on us, and we don't want that, and we will fight back.
Welcome back. On Wednesday, the government announced delays to a voucher subsidy scheme, making it easier for elderly people to stay in privately run residential homes. In last year's policy address, Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying asked the Elderly Commission to study a scheme to give up to $11,000 worth of vouchers to eligible residents. It was expected to be launched in September. Now the Commission wants more time to gather information. While we're waiting, official figures suggest that 7 out of every 100 elderly people have to live in care homes. Last week, disturbing evidence of mistreatment of residents at one such home came to light, and there's undoubtedly more we don't see. In response to complaints from local residents, last Tuesday the Mingbao newspaper released a video of residents of the Tai Po Cambridge Elderly Nursing Home being undressed and left naked in public view on an open-air podium. They'd been left there while staff prepared to take them to shower. The next day, outraged by the images and what they suggested about the quality of privately run elderly homes, protesters gathered outside the home. Jessie's grandmother is one of the victims seen in the video.
當睇到呢段新聞出咗嚟嘅時候，真係好震驚，同埋唔相信點解會發生咁嘅事咯。作為一間咁大嘅集團，佢人手已經係好不足㗎啦。我覺得呢一間院舍裏面嘅老闆真係好不負責任咁去將所有責任推落去啲員工嘅身上。既然你講到話開咁多次大會都係因為沖涼呢個問題，咁點解你唔早去將呢一個員工去解僱佢呢？係咪先？今次俾人哋影到，應該唔係第一次㗎啦。你一定係發生過好多次，人哋睇唔過眼投訴過，你亦都冇正視嘅問題。
It was not the first thing Jessie had seen that made her suspicious about how the home treated its residents.
我哋上去老人院探嫲嫲嘅時候，有時都會發現佢啲手啊或者腳啊會有啲瘀痕。其實我嫲嫲需要夜晚係着恤衣衫嘅。夜班某一個姑娘對啲公公婆婆幾惡嘅，最緊要綁實你，就令到你唔好喐，唔好俾佢有更麻煩、更多嘢做。我亦都曾經有見過有一個伯伯，佢好唔開心發脾氣，大吵大鬧，跟住直情將自己面前嘅飯餸一步步咗落地下，跟住姑娘就好大聲同佢講：你唔食唔好倒啊！俾咁多功夫我做，你想死啊咁樣，不斷去鬧個伯伯，阿伯伯又發爛渣，跟住佢將個伯伯拱咗落地下，由得佢喺個地下嗰度點床點隻，由得佢喺度嗌：你慢慢嗌啦你，冇人理你㗎！不斷去講啲説話，令到個老人家係好難受啊！
Social worker and legislator Fernando Cheung says that this scandal shows that Hong Kong's Social Welfare Department failed to carry out its supervisory duties for maintaining standards.
The monitoring system of SWD absolutely fails. In the past 5 years, SWD made 96 inspections, and they call these sudden without prior notice inspections. None of these inspections revealed that they did bathing in such a manner. And they also issued 15 warning letters to this home, and there's no charges pressed. And none of these warning letters has anything to do with this bathing procedure.
But the release of the video and accompanying news reports did force the Social Welfare Department to take action. Just 3 days after the story came out, the department announced that the licence of the Tai Po Cambridge Nursing Homes branch at Wan Tau Street would not be renewed. The fear is that this is the tip of the iceberg and that mistreatment of the elderly in such homes is more widespread. Every day, Miss Sin takes food to her husband, who lives in a privately run elderly home. She's never sure whether the staff are giving him enough to eat. Hong Kong's an ageing society, and yet, despite years of criticism, the government shows no sign of coming up with a comprehensive long-term elderly care policy or of planning for elderly homes offering better services. Bizarrely, in the eyes of many people, Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying says it's all about land supply.
如果我哋可以喺一個問題上有一啲突破，我相信會對整個香港老人院院舍服務會帶嚟一啲轉機。呢個就係土地嘅問題。
It is certainly not a problem of supply of land. It is a problem of lack of commitment on the part of the government to take care of the elderly in Hong Kong. You look at the New Territory Northeast Development Project, they are basically bulldozing away some 20-some buildings that are currently being utilized as elderly homes. There are about 1,000 elderly living in these homes, and they would give them up for, again, other development purposes.
Located in Kudong in the northern New Territories, the Shek Jai Ling elderly village may not be a perfect home, but compared to many other private elderly homes in Hong Kong, its standards are acceptable to the residents. But their homes are soon to be gone. The government plans to demolish the current 16 elderly care centres, which houses some 1,000 people in 2 phases, to make way for the controversial North East New Territories New Development Areas project. 8 will be demolished by 2018. 300 elderly people will be affected. The Secretary for Labour and Welfare, Matthew Cheung, maintains that a new facility near Kudong will accommodate 1,100 residents, but the new centre won't be finished until 2023.
成個長者村咧都已經係有成千個長者喺度啦，佢哋都習慣咗呢度嘅生活啦。咁變咗我哋嘅經營者咧，其實都我哋自己都唔捨得離開啦，係咪？
Out of an estimated 29,000 people on the waiting list for a place in a home, every year some 5,000 die before gaining access to one of these residences. In addition, the elderly care sector has a problem of acute manpower shortage in nursing homes.
就算我哋面對有啲同事可能嗰個工作表現啊或者態度唔係咁理想都好啦，我哋真係都用唔落手啦，我哋都要去離開都好啦。其實好快佢已經喺翻我哋石仔嶺呢一個嘅環境裏邊咧，係好快揾得翻另外一個僱主請佢都唔奇嘅，因為其實大家都要搏㗎啦。我冇人，我又要俾社會處嚟到查牌嘅時候咧，咁跟住又發警告信啊，發得多警告信，跟住又會檢控啊咁樣。
有時啊，又有執屎真尿啊、運片啊嗰啲啊。 有嗰啲好似睇開精神科嗰啲咧，你有時佢又嗰啲情緒波動又好大咧，所以又有特別照顧嗰啲都麻煩啲。不要日老院，規劃要長遠。
社署嗰個院舍嗰個服務條例咧，喺1996年嗰時停落，佢嗰個要求係好低嘅，因為佢驚嗰啲私院如果嚴格嘅話，冚唪唥執晒笠。因為呢20年嚟咧都冇改過個條例，咁間接係助長咗啲私院，覺得咁樣做係冇問題嘅。
It might be a good thing for outside volunteers to regularly pay visit to these people, and while they are visiting these elderly residents, they could obviously observe if they have the training, observe for irregular happenings like ill treatments and all that, and immediately they could report to the authority they know.
Besides finding ways of detecting abuses in these nursing homes, there is the fundamental problem of low income that prevents homes from improving the quality of life. Tens of thousands of elderly people who live in these homes rely on the Comprehensive Social Security Assistance Scheme, or CSSA, to pay their living expenses, which amounts to $5,000 to $7,000 per person per month.
政府就俾咗綜援呢個長者，咁於是乎長者或者佢家人咧就攞住呢個綜援咧就去到安老院舍嗰度，咁安老院舍就見到你淨係得綜援，好啦，我哋用綜援去收你啦，咁啊令到嗰個嘅質素就係就住綜援價錢咁樣去發展咯。
Particularly the private residential homes will help them to apply for CSSA, and they hold the passport of the bank that received the CSSA. So somehow there is a kind of imbalance. Of if you take the family members as consumers, they don't really have the usual power of a consumer. So if we want to improve the quality, the empowerment of the family members is important.
And I'm afraid that's all we have time for this week. You know what we're going to see to close this week's programme, but we'll see you at the same time next week. Goodbye.